Space was quiet. It was always quiet. But there was a difference between the quiet of empty space and the quiet of a dying ship. One was peaceful. The other was the kind of quiet that sat in your chest like a stone and refused to move. The pale meridian was dying. It drifted through the Vareth corridor like a broken leaf floating down a dark river. Its engines had gone cold 2 hours ago. Its hull had 3 deep cracks running along the left side, each one slowly hissing out heat and air. Half the lights inside were dead. The ones that still worked flickered like they were too tired to keep going. The ship groaned every few minutes, a low metal sound that reminded everyone aboard that it was holding together by less and less. Commander Yirael Sun stood at the front of the bridge and stared out at the stars. He had 4 eyes, and all 4 of them were red with exhaustion. His body was covered in pale, hard plates, the natural armor of the Sen people, and most of those plates had small cracks in them too, from the battle 3 hours ago. He had not slept in 2 days. He was not sure when he would sleep again. He was not sure he would get the chance. Behind him, what was left of his crew moved around quietly and carefully. There were 21 of them still on their feet. 21 more were in the medical bay, lying on cots, kept alive by machines that were slowly running out of power. The rest had not made it through the ambush. The Dothraki had come out of nowhere. They always did. The Dothraki hegemony had been at war with the Sen Collective for 31 years, and in that time, they had learned every trick, every route, every place where a Sen ship might pass through and let its guard down. The Vareth corridor had seemed safe. It had not been safe. 3 Dothraki warships had appeared from behind a dead moon and opened fire before anyone on the Pale Meridian could even raise shields. The ship had not been built for fighting. It was a medical frigate, carrying doctors and wounded soldiers and a small group of refugee families from a destroyed Sen colony. It had 1 defensive gun and a crew that had never expected to use it. The gun was now a melted piece of metal on the outside of the hull, and the crew was doing everything they could just to stay alive. Yirael San turned away from the stars and looked at his communications officer, a young Sen named Vasi. She was small and quick, and she had been working at her console without stopping since the attack. Her plates were pale with stress. She looked up at him when he approached. "What do we have?" he asked. "The emergency beacon is running," she said. "Sen Collective Command knows we are here, but the nearest Sen ship is 6 hours away, at full speed." She paused. "We have about 4 hours of breathable air left. Maybe a little more." Yirael San did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the crew around him. He looked through the cracked door at the end of the bridge, where he could see the medical bay, the rows of cots, the wounded, the 3 small children curled up against each other in the corner, wrapped in emergency blankets. Refugee children. They had already lost everything once. He had promised them they were safe now. He turned back to Vasi. "Open all frequencies," he said. Vasi looked up at him. "All of them?" "Every single one we can reach." He sat down beside her. "Including the primitive bands." Vasi understood what he meant. There was a set of old, wide-range frequencies used by a species on the far edge of the corridor. A young species, new to space, barely noticed by the rest of the galaxy. Most of the older civilizations did not bother with those frequencies because there was never anything important on them, just odd music and strange long conversations and occasional bursts of noise that seemed to be some kind of entertainment broadcast. Humans. That was what they called themselves. The Sen knew very little about them. They had 1 station in deep space, a small thing called Waypoint Helio, sitting at the outer edge of the Vareth corridor. It was not impressive. It was not powerful. When Yirael San had first heard about it, someone had described it as looking like someone had taken a collection of old parts and welded them together with great enthusiasm and very little planning. He did not expect a reply. He was not even sure why he was doing it, except that he had run out of other options, and the children in the corner were sleeping, and he wanted to feel like he had tried everything. Vasi opened the signal. Yirael San leaned toward the transmitter and spoke clearly and slowly. "This is Commander Yirael San of the Sen medical frigate Pale Meridian. We are adrift in the Vareth corridor at coordinates 774, Mark 9. We have wounded aboard. We have civilians aboard. Our engines are destroyed, and we are losing air. We are sending this signal on all available frequencies. We are asking for any ship that can hear this, any ship at all, to please respond." He sat back. The bridge was very quiet. The ship groaned again in its slow, tired way. Vasi watched her screen. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The crew had stopped pretending to work and were just sitting or standing, listening to nothing. Then, 17 minutes after the signal went out, the speaker on Vasi's console made a sound. Not static. Not a burst of noise. A voice. A human voice, speaking in rough but understandable galactic common, with an accent that none of them had ever heard before. "This is the ESV Resolute Kindness, out of Waypoint Helio. We received your signal, Commander. We are reading your position. We are on our way." A short pause. Then the voice added, in a tone that was warm and very direct, "Hold on. We are coming to you. Do not give up yet." Nobody on the bridge moved for a moment. They all just looked at each other. Vasi's 4 eyes were wide. One of the crew members at the back of the room made a small sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. Uriel-san looked back out at the stars. Somewhere out there, a human ship was turning around and heading toward them. A species that barely knew how to fly past its own sun was coming to help. Not a send ship, not a warship. A human repair vessel named, of all things, the Resolute Kindness. He did not know what to make of that name. He had never heard of a ship being named after something soft. He pulled up the star map and found Waypoint Helio. He measured the distance. The Resolute Kindness could make it in just under 2 hours at full speed, which would leave just enough time to do something before the air ran out if they were fast, and if they were good at what they did. He had no idea whether humans were good at anything. He was about to find out. Outside the cracked windows, the stars did not move. The ship groaned again. One of the refugee children stirred in their sleep, murmured something, and went quiet. Uriel-san sat down in his chair, folded his 4 hands together, and waited. The times Resolute Kindness times appeared on the send sensors 1 hour and 44 minutes after the signal. Vasi saw it first and announced it without emotion, because she was trying very hard to stay calm and professional. But her voice cracked a little at the end, and no one said anything about that. The human ship was not what any of them expected. It was not sleek. It was not military. It looked, to be very honest about it, like it had been repaired many times by many different people who did not all agree on how repairs should look. There were patches of different metals along the hull. Some sections were clearly newer than others. It had extra equipment bolted to its sides, arms, and tools and containers that stuck out in different directions, like the legs of an insect that had grown too many of them. It was not beautiful, but it moved with a kind of steady confidence that was hard not to notice. And it came in with its hazard lights on. Not weapons. Hazard lights. The soft yellow-orange blink that said, "I am here. I am not a threat. I just want you to see me coming." First Officer Thesson stood beside Uriel-san and watched the human ship slide into position just off their port side. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, "They did not charge their weapons." "No," said Uriel-san. "They did not. They came into an active war corridor, in the middle of a hostile situation, and they did not charge their weapons." "That is correct." Thesson had no further comment. He simply stared at the times, Resolute Kindness times, with all 4 of his eyes, and tried to decide what to do with that information. The docking connection took 8 minutes. The airlock opened, and the humans came aboard. There were 7 of them in the first group. They were all wearing suits patched, worn suits covered in small marks and drawings and handwritten words that no one on the Sen crew could read. Each of them was carrying something. Tools, mostly. Bags of equipment. One of them, a younger one, with dark hair and a wide face, was also carrying a large case with a red cross painted on it, which Vasi had looked up and confirmed was the ancient human symbol for medicine. The one leading the group was a woman. She was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown skin and short hair, and the look of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had simply decided that being tired was not going to be a problem right now. She walked with complete certainty, the way a person walks when they know exactly what needs to be done and how long they have to do it. She had a large toolkit hanging from her belt and, in her other hand, a round metal container with a lid on it that was producing a strong and unusual smell. She stopped in front of Urael-san and gave him a short, direct nod. "Commander Urael-san, I am Chief Engineer Mara Oduya, ESV Resolute Kindness." Her galactic common was rough, but clear. "I need to see your engine room, your hull breach points, and your power grid in that order. My team will start on the hull. I will handle the engines personally." She glanced around the bridge with quick, sharp eyes. "How much time do we have on the air?" "Approximately 2 hours and 15 minutes, said Vasi. Mara nodded, like this was an inconvenient but workable fact. "Then we will be done in 2 hours." She turned to her crew and said something in a language that was not galactic common, fast and short, full of hard sounds, and they immediately spread out through the ship without waiting to be guided, moving like they had done this 100 times before, which Urael-san would later learn they had. Mara held out the metal container toward him. He looked at it, then at her. "Drink," she said simply. "It is hot. It will help." He did not know what was inside it. He did not entirely trust it, but there was something in the way she offered it calm. No ceremony. The way you might hand something to a friend that made refusing feel wrong. He took the container. She showed him how to open the lid. He brought it close to his face, and the smell hit him dark, rich, sharp, and warm all at once. He took a small sip. It was bitter. It was very strange. It was also, somehow, the best thing he had tasted in 2 days. "What is this?" he asked. "Coffee," she said, already walking toward the engine room. "Very old human tradition. Come on, show me the damage." While Mara worked, the young human with the medical case had found the medical bay on his own. His name, one of the Sen medics would later learn, was Tomas. He was not particularly big. He had a quiet way of moving, like he did not want to take up too much space. But he went directly to the most badly wounded patient in the room, a Sen soldier with burns across half his body, and without asking permission, without making any announcements, he simply opened his case and got to work. The Sen medics watched him for a moment, uncertain. Then one of them moved to help him, and he looked up and gave a small, tired smile. And they worked together without needing many words. There were 3 children in the corner of the medical bay. They had not spoken since the attack. They had barely moved. They just sat close together under their blankets and watched everything with large, frightened eyes. Tomas noticed them after about 20 minutes. He did not go to them immediately. He kept working. But while he worked, he started humming a low, quiet sound. Not a song exactly, just a rhythm, easy and slow. After a few minutes, he started talking to his instruments in a soft voice, saying things like, "All right, let's see. And, there we go. And, almost done." He was not talking to the children, but the children were listening. An hour passed. Mara's voice came over the internal comm line in short bursts as she worked through the engine room. Her crew sent updates from the hull patches. The power grid came back to 60%, then 70%. The lights stopped flickering. Thesson watched all of this from a distance and said nothing for a long time. Then he walked over to Urael-san and spoke quietly. "They are not asking for payment." "No," said Urael-san. "They are not asking what side we are on." "No, they are not asking for anything at all." "No," said Urael-san. He looked at the metal container still in his hands. There was a little coffee left at the bottom. He drank it. "They just came." Thesson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was genuinely puzzled and not unkind, "What kind of creature does that?" From the engine room, the sound of Mara working carried through the walls, the clang of tools, the hiss of something being sealed, and once, a short burst of laughter when one of her crew said something she found funny. Even in the middle of all of it, she laughed. Brief and real, like laughter was something she refused to give up, no matter how hard the work was. Urael-san set the empty container down on the console beside him. "I have no idea," he said, "but I am very glad they exist." In the corner of the medical bay, one of the refugee children, The smallest one, a girl with big gray eyes, had stopped staring at nothing. She was watching Tomas work. And after a while, slowly and carefully, she uncurled from her blanket and moved a little closer. The repairs were 60% done when the alarms went off. It was not a gradual warning. It was not a soft beep. The long-range sensors lit up all at once, and the sound that came from them was sharp and loud and immediate, the kind of sound that does not leave any room for doubt about what it means. Vassie was at her console in less than 2 seconds. Her hands moved fast across the screen, and her face went very still in the way that faces go still when the news is bad, and there is no time to react to how bad it is. FTL signatures, she said. Multiple. Coming out of jump directly ahead. Uriel-san was already moving toward her. How many? 4 ships. She paused. Her voice dropped. Doraki configuration. 3 destroyers. 1 carrier-class dreadnought. The bridge went quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The stone-in-the-chest kind. The 4 Doraki ships came out of faster-than-light travel, with the precision that only comes from doing something many times before. They appeared in a spread formation, surrounding the 2 ships on 3 sides, and within seconds, their targeting systems were active. Every Sen crew member on the bridge knew what that felt like. The sensors had a way of showing it, a kind of pressure on the display, like the universe itself was leaning in. The Doraki had painted them. Both ships. The times Pale Meridian Times, and the times Resolute Kindness. Mara Oduya came onto the bridge 2 minutes later, wiping her hands on a cloth, her toolkit still on her belt. She had clearly been told by one of her crew through a personal comm. She looked at the sensor display, read the formation, and said one short word in her own language that was almost certainly not polite. Then she stood next to Uriel-san and crossed her arms. "Is this the same group that hit you before?" she asked. "It is possible," said Uriel-san. "The formation is familiar." The Doraki opened a channel without being asked to. That was always how they did it. They did not wait, did not request, did not ask permission. They simply appeared and began talking, because they had never needed to ask permission for anything. The commander who spoke was named Veth Karan. He was large, even by Doraki standards. His species was built in hard angles, narrow faces, heavy armored shoulders, eyes that sat deep in their heads, and seemed to calculate everything they looked at in terms of how useful or how threatening it was. He had the voice of someone who had given orders for a very long time, and had never once been told no. He spoke in Galactic Common, clearly enough that everyone on both ships could understand. The Sen vessel is under impound order by the Doraki hegemony. Its crew and passengers will be detained for processing. You will power down immediately and prepare to be boarded. He looked at something off to the side, probably a reading from his own sensors. Then he looked back. The human vessel will be permitted to leave. This is not your war. You do not belong here. Go back to your little station and leave this matter to those who understand it. The channel stayed open. He was waiting for acknowledgement. There was a pause on the bridge of the Times Pale Meridian. Uriel-san said nothing. He looked at Mara. She was looking at the screen, at the image of Veth Karan, with an expression that was very calm and very flat and not entirely friendly. She stepped toward the comm panel. "Commander Veth Karan," she said. Her voice was even. "My name is Chief Engineer Mara Oduya. I am in the middle of a repair job. The people on this ship are under my protection while I am working on it." She paused for exactly 1 second. "I am asking you, respectfully, to give me 4 more hours to finish. After that, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Veth Karan's expression did not change much, but something behind his eyes shifted a small, cold movement. The kind that happens when someone in power is deciding how much force they want to use to make a point. "You are a repair engineer on a salvage ship," he said. "You are not a military force. You are not a political body. You have no authority here. I am not going to wait 4 hours because a human with a toolkit asked me to." He reached off screen. On the sensor display, the energy readings from the Doraki ships spiked. Weapons were powering up. Not targeting locks, actual weapons charge. The difference mattered. Targeting locks were a warning. Weapons charge was a statement. Mara turned away from the comm panel and walked to the small secondary console on the left side of the bridge. It had been there when they arrived, a navigation console, normally. But when she sat down at it and pulled up its interface, it was not navigation anymore. Her crew had quietly connected it to the Time's Resolute Kindness times during the first hour of repairs, running a line through the docking bridge. She had not said anything about it. No one had noticed. Iriel-san watched her. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "Something we should have done a long time ago," she said. She typed for 40 seconds. Her fingers moved fast and without hesitation, like someone who had already planned this and was simply now executing it. Then, she hit a single key. The Time's Resolute Kindness times sent a broadcast. It was not loud. It was not a weapon. It was a tight beam signal, directed with precision into the Doraki battle group's internal communications network, not to jam it, not to disrupt it, but to add something to it. A file. A large one. 3 years of files, in fact. The Time's Resolute Kindness times was a repair and salvage ship. In 3 years of working the Vareth corridor, it had pulled apart a lot of wreckage. It had picked up a lot of damaged ships. It had taken in a lot of people wounded, exhausted, displaced, and during all of that time, Mara's crew had done what humans tend to do when they are surrounded by suffering and injustice. They had written it down. Flight logs from destroyed Sen ships with timestamps and last known positions. Testimonies from refugees, recorded with permission, describing in clear detail what had happened to their homes and their families. Coordinates, pulled from debris and wreckage, of locations that the Doraki had never officially acknowledged. Locations where people had been taken. Locations that had no official name on any map because they were not supposed to exist. 27 Doraki black site prison camps across the Vareth corridor. All of it, in a single file, transmitted at full strength, across every frequency the Doraki ships used, and beyond them, across the open bands, to every Sen ship, every neutral vessel, every long-range monitoring station within range. Within 90 seconds, the data was everywhere. There was no taking it back. Veth Karan went very still. On the sensor display, the weapons charge on the Doraki ships held at its peak for a long moment. Then, slowly, it began to drop. Not because Veth Karan wanted to lower it, but because he was a smart enough commander to understand what had just happened. He could fire. He could destroy both ships right now. But the data was already out. Firing now would not delete it. It would only confirm it, loudly, in front of everyone who was now watching. And everyone was watching. Mara leaned back slightly in her chair. 4 hours, she said again, toward the still open comm channel. Her voice had not changed. She said it the way you remind someone of something they already agreed to. Politely. Calmly. Like she had not just turned the entire political landscape of the Vareth corridor upside down in less than 2 minutes. Veth Karan did not respond. But he did not fire. Iriel-san stood in the middle of his bridge and looked at the woman sitting at his navigation console. And for a long moment, he did not know what to say. He had been in this war for 11 years. He had watched Doraki commanders do whatever they wanted, for as long as he could remember, because they were powerful enough to do it. He had never once seen one of them stop. He had just watched a human engineer, with no weapons, make one stop. Not with strength, not with firepower, with a file. He found his voice. "You had that data the entire time?" Mara looked at him. There was something tired in her eyes, and something else too, something quiet and steady and very old, like the feeling in a room that has seen a lot of history pass through it. "We listen," she said simply. Humans always listen. The next 2 hours were the strangest of Uriel-san's life. Outside, 4 Doraki warships held their position and did nothing. They could not fire. They could not board. The data was already in circulation, spreading through Sen channels, neutral channels, diplomatic channels, the long-range monitoring networks of a dozen different species who had been watching the Vareth corridor war from a safe distance for decades. Every minute that passed, more people knew. Every minute that passed, it became harder for the Doraki to pretend that the data was false, or exaggerated, or a trick. Too many eyes were on it now. Too many names were in it. Veth Karan had closed the channel. His ships simply sat there, like four large animals that had been stopped mid-step and did not know what direction to move in. And inside the time's pale meridian, the repairs continued. Mara went back to the engine room. Her crew went back to the hull. The work did not slow down. If anything, it moved faster, as if the encounter with the Doraki had been nothing more than an interruption, like a phone call during a meal, something to deal with and then set aside. Urael-san did not go back to his post. He followed Mara, not to get in the way, not to give orders. He just found himself needing to understand something, and the only way to understand it was to stay near the person who seemed to hold the answer. He stood at the edge of the engine room while she worked, watching her move around the machinery with the ease of someone who had taken it apart and put it back together enough times that the pieces felt like old friends. After a while, she noticed he was still there. She did not tell him to leave. She just glanced at him and said, "Ask the question." "You have been standing there trying to figure out how to ask it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long have you been collecting that information?" 3 years, she said. She was tightening something at the back of the main engine housing. Her body turned away from him. "Since we got assigned to the corridor. You were never going to use it for anything?" He paused. "Before now? I was always going to use it," she said. "Just not before I had enough of it to matter." She finished what she was doing and turned around, leaning against the machinery and looking at him directly. If you show up with a little bit of evidence, people argue about it. They call it incomplete. They say, you misunderstood something. But if you show up with 3 years of evidence, dates, coordinates, names, voices, there is not much left to argue about. Urael-san thought about this. "You planned for this moment?" "Not exactly this moment," she said. "But something like it. Eventually." She shrugged in the way that humans shrugged one movement. Both shoulders. Like laying something down. "We have a concept. My people. It is hard to translate perfectly, but it means something like bearing witness. Being present for something that is wrong, and making sure it is recorded. Making sure somebody knows." He had never heard those two words put together that way. Bearing witness. He turned them over in his mind. "Why?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because the worst thing that can happen to a terrible act is that no one ever knows it happened. If no one knows, nothing changes. The people who did it keep doing it. The people who suffered from it are forgotten." She crossed her arms slowly. "My species has a very long, and not always good history. We have done terrible things to each other. We know what happens when powerful people are allowed to act without anyone watching. We learned that lesson badly, over a long time, with a lot of pain." She paused. "So we watch. And we write things down. And we keep the records. Because someday, the records matter." Uriel-san stood with that for a while. From somewhere deeper in the ship, he could hear the sounds of the other human engineers, the noise of work, and occasionally the sound of conversation, and once a short burst of laughter that he had already learned to recognize as something Mara's crew did regularly, almost automatically, the way other species breathed. "The drink," he said after a moment. "The coffee. What is it?" Mara's expression changed slightly. It became something softer and a little more private, like he had asked about something she did not usually explain to strangers, but did not mind explaining now. "It is a drink made from roasted seeds," she said. "We have been drinking it for hundreds of years. It keeps you awake when you are tired. It warms you up when you are cold." She paused. "But it is more than that. It is what you make when someone arrives and you want them to know that you see them, that they are welcome, that they can sit down." She looked at him steadily. "My grandmother used to say that you can learn everything about a person from how they behave when they offer you something hot to drink. If they hand it to you and walk away, it is polite. If they sit down with you and have a cup themselves, it means something more." "You sat down with us," said Uriel-san. "I always sit down," she said. Then she turned back to the engine and got back to work. In the medical bay, something quiet was happening. Tomas had been working for almost 3 hours without a break. He had treated 11 patients, 2 of them in serious condition. One of them, the burned soldier, who would need more care than a field kit could give, but who was now stable and breathing without pain. He had done all of this without being asked, without being directed, without saying very much to anyone. The 3 refugee children were no longer in the corner. They were sitting on the floor a few feet away from where he worked. The smallest one, the girl with gray eyes, had moved closest. She had been watching his hands for a long time. He had noticed without making a big thing of it. He kept working, kept using his low, soft voice, kept humming that same easy rhythm. At some point, the girl had pointed at one of the small drawings on the sleeve of his suit, a round shape with lines coming off it, like a simple sun. He had looked down at it and said, "That one is from my daughter. She drew it before I left for this tour. She said it was to keep me warm when the ship got cold." The girl did not speak, but she kept looking at the drawing. Tomas moved on to the next patient. After a while, he heard a very small voice say something. He looked over. The girl was speaking, slowly and carefully, in Sen, which he did not know. But one of the Sen medics came over and listened, and then looked at Tomas and said, "She asks if the sun drawing worked. If you were warm." Tomas looked at the girl for a moment. He smiled, not a big smile, a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes before it reaches the mouth. "Very warm," he said. "Every single day." The girl looked at him for a long time. Then she turned and said something to the other 2 children, and slowly, carefully, they all moved a little closer. By the time Mara called the engines back online, and the time's pale meridian times shuddered and hummed back to life around them, all 3 children were sitting beside Tomas on the floor, each one looking at a different drawing on his suit, and he was telling them, slowly and gently, the story of each one. The ship was being repaired. That was true, but something harder to fix than an engine had also been quietly, carefully, put back together in the hours since the time's resolute kindness times arrived. Something that had broken in those children long before the ambush. Something that the tools in Mara's kit could not touch. They had not come with that intention. They had just come to fix a ship. But humans, it turned out, had a way of fixing more than they were asked to. The engines of the time's pale meridian times came back online at the start of the 4th hour. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no great roar, no shaking of the hull. The ship simply shifted from the deep stillness of powerlessness into a low, steady hum, the sound of something that had been broken beginning to work again. The lights came on properly. The air recyclers kicked in with full strength. The temperature, which had been slowly dropping, began to climb back toward normal. On the bridge, several crew members stopped what they were doing and just stood still for a moment, letting the hum move through them. Some of them touched the walls. It was not a conscious thing. It was just the hands of people who had thought their ship was finished, reaching out to confirm that it was not. Vasi, at her console, looked at her readings and then looked at Uriel-san. "Full power," she said. "Engines at 92%. Hull patches are holding." Uriel-san nodded slowly. He was watching the sensor display that showed the 4 Doraki ships still sitting outside. They had not moved in 3 hours. They had not spoken. They had simply waited, like they were hoping the situation would resolve itself without them having to make a decision they could not take back. Then, at that same moment, new signatures appeared on the sensor screen. These were not Doraki. They were coming from the opposite direction, from deep within Sen space, moving fast. Vasi looked at the readings and her posture changed immediately. "Sen Collective Escort Fleet," she said. 6 ships, heavy armed. They are reading our beacon. They will be here in 12 minutes. And at the same moment, almost exactly the same moment, as if the timing had been coordinated by something larger than anyone in the room, the communication console began receiving signals. Not from the Doraki. From stations and ships further out. A Verath monitoring post, flagging the data broadcast for official review. A neutral arbitration vessel, requesting a full account of events. 2 Sen diplomatic channels that had been dark for months, suddenly active. Then one more signal. This one from a source that almost no one in the Verath corridor had ever communicated with directly before. It came through the general band, the wide, open channel in simple galactic common, short and clear. It was from the Galactic Arbitration Assembly, the oldest neutral political body in the known systems, a group that had not issued a formal intervention in 60 years. a group that most species thought of as existing mostly to meet, discuss, and do very little else. The message said, "We have received and reviewed the broadcast of this date. We are calling for an immediate ceasefire between the Dothraki hegemony and the Sen collective. All parties are requested to stand down pending formal review proceedings." This is not a suggestion. Uriel San read the message 3 times. He had been fighting this war for 11 years. In 11 years, the Galactic Arbitration Assembly had issued 4 formal statements about the conflict. All 4 of them had been what could generously be called polite expressions of concern. They had changed nothing. They had stopped nothing. The Dothraki had read them and continued exactly as before, because there had been no cost to ignoring them. But this was different. This was not a statement of concern. This was a ceasefire call, and it had come 3 hours after a human salvage engineer had dropped 27 pieces of evidence on every channel in the corridor. On the sensor screen, the Dothraki ships began to move. Not toward them. Away. The 3 destroyers turned first, sliding back in the direction they had come from. The carrier dreadnought held its position for an extra 30 seconds, which felt, to everyone watching, like Veth Karan sitting very still and making a decision about whether pride was worth more than survival. Then it too turned and began to move away. They left without a word. Mara was standing at the back of the bridge, her toolkit still on her belt, her coffee thermos empty and tucked under one arm. She watched the Dothraki ships go and said nothing. Her expression was not triumphant. It was not excited. It was the expression of someone watching something that was always going to happen. Finally happen. Patient. A little tired. Satisfied in the quiet way of someone who did a job correctly. One of the younger Sen crew members, a boy, barely old enough to be on a military vessel, turned toward her and said, in a voice that was equal parts amazed and confused, "You knew that would work?" Mara looked at him. "I knew it had a chance," she said. "That is all you ever know." The Sen escort fleet arrived 10 minutes later and formed a protective ring around the Time's pale meridian. The lead captain opened a channel to Uriel San and spoke for a long time, relief, questions, formal language, updates on the diplomatic situation already developing back in Sen space. Uriel San listened and responded, and kept one eye on the part of the bridge where Mara and her crew were gathering their equipment and preparing to leave. He ended the call and crossed the bridge to her. She was closing the clasps on her toolkit when he stopped in front of her. She looked up. There were things he wanted to say. He had been thinking about them for the last 2 hours and had not been able to organize them into the right words. He was a commander. He was good with orders and reports and tactical language. He was not good with the kind of words that this moment seemed to need. He tried anyway. "We would not be alive without you," he said. "Not because of the engines, because of all of it. The way you came in, the way your crew worked, the way your medic sat with my children on the floor and told them stories." He stopped. "I do not have words in galactic common for what that means to us." Mara looked at him for a moment. "You do not need to have the words," she said. "It is enough that you know." He took a slow breath. "How do your people do it?" he said. "You live in a galaxy that has been at war longer than your species has been in space. You have no army. You have no great power. And you came out here anyway. And you just..." He stopped. He did not know how to finish the sentence. "We do not know how not to," she said simply. "That is the honest answer. We see something broken. We try to fix it. We see someone hurt. We try to help. It is not always smart. It does not always work. But we keep doing it because the other option is to stop. And we are not very good at stopping." She held out her hand. He had learned in the last few hours that this was a human greeting and a human goodbye, the same gesture, used for both, which seemed very efficient. He took her hand and pressed it the way she had shown him. "If you ever need repairs," she said, "you know where to find us." She left with her crew the same way she had arrived. No ceremony. No long farewell. Just people who had a job to do, moving toward the next one. The docking connection released. The Times, Resolute Kindness Times, pulled away from the Times, Pale Meridian Times, with its hazard lights still blinking that soft, steady yellow-orange, until it cleared their visual range and was gone. Uriel San filed his official report to the Senhai Council the following day. He was thorough and exact in everything, because he always was. But when he reached the section marked Times Allied Assistance, he wrote something that he knew was not standard report language. He wrote it anyway. They arrived with no army. They carried tools and a warm drink, and 3 years of recorded truth. They did not end the war with violence. They ended it with the one thing we had stopped believing, still worked the simple and devastating act of making sure everyone knew what had happened. They did not do this to be heroes. They did it because they were paying attention. I am not sure the galaxy deserves them, but I am grateful, beyond what I can properly write in a report, that they are here. The ceasefire negotiations between the Doraki hegemony and the Sen Collective formally began 11 days later. They were long and difficult and not yet finished, but they had begun. On Waypoint Helio, Mara Oduya slept for 14 hours. When she woke up, she made coffee a full pot, strong, the way she always made it. She stood in the small kitchen of the station's crew quarters, both hands around her mug, looking out the small round window at the stars of the Verith corridor. There were 7 new distress signals in the queue. She had seen them before she went to sleep. 1 was a cargo vessel with a failed reactor. 2 were civilian ships caught near conflict zones. The others she had not read yet. She finished her coffee. She washed the mug